started with a phone call. Not an accusatory shout or a dramatic confession. Just a single word that changed everything. Run. The voice on the other end was shaky, rushed, but unmistakable. It was Emily, my wife's best friend. Before I could ask anything, the line went dead. First, I didn't think much of it. Emily was known for her dramatics, always spinning minor inconveniences into grand crises. But something about her tone, urgent, terrified, refused to let me rest. I called back, but she didn't answer. Then I called Rachel, my wife, and she didn't pick up either. Rachel was supposed to be at a work dinner that night. Her job in marketing often involved late nights and networking events, so I hadn't questioned it. But now, my gut told me something was wrong. I drove to Emily's apartment. The door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the cool night breeze. Inside, the place was a mess. Furniture overturned, glass shattered on the floor. My pulse quickened as I called out for Emily. No response. My first thought was to call the police, but something stopped me. A feeling, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me this was bigger than it seemed. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper on Emily's kitchen counter. My name was scrawled across the front in her familiar handwriting. Inside was a brief, cryptic note. Asterisk, don't trust her. She's not who you think she is. Asterisk. My heart sank. She had to mean Rachel. But why? Emily and Rachel had been inseparable since college. If something was wrong between them, it had to be serious. I grabbed the note and left, heading home. The house was dark and eerily silent when I arrived. Rachel's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't answering my calls. I stepped inside, calling her name, but there was no response. In the living room, her phone sat on the coffee table, buzzing intermittently with incoming messages. I picked it up, my curiosity overcoming my hesitation. The messages were from an unsaved number. Asterisk, it's done. He doesn't suspect a thing. Asterisk, meet me at the cabin tomorrow. A cold chill ran down my spine. He had to be me. But what didn't I suspect? And what cabin? Before I could process anything, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard behind me. I spun around to see Rachel standing in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes unreadable. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice flat. "What's going on, Rachel?" I held up her phone. "Who are you meeting at the cabin?" For a moment, she just stared at me, and I thought she might deny everything. But then her lips curled into a faint smile, not warm or apologetic, but cold and calculating. "You weren't supposed to find out," she said. "Find out what?" My voice cracked under the weight of fear and anger. She stepped closer, her expression unchanging. "It's better if you don't know. For your sake." That was the moment I realized I didn't know the woman I'd been married to for 7 years. Everything about her felt foreign, dangerous. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to get away. I bolted for the door, but Rachel was faster. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed. I broke free, stumbling out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding down the road with no destination in mind. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but one thing was clear. Emily's warning had been more than justified. The next day, I went to the cabin mentioned in the text messages. It was an old property Rachel's family owned, tucked away in the woods an hour outside of town. I'd only been there a handful of times, and the place always gave me an uneasy feeling. Now it felt like walking into a trap. The cabin looked deserted when I arrived. The door was locked, but a quick search around the property revealed a broken window around the back. I climbed inside, landing in the dusty living room. The place smelled of mildew and neglect, but it was clear someone had been there recently. A pair of muddy boots sat by the door, and an empty coffee cup rested on the counter. In the corner of the room, a laptop sat open on a small table. The screen displayed a series of documents and photos. My heart raced as I stepped closer, recognizing some of the faces in the photos. Rachel was in several of them, along with men I didn't recognize. They were grainy surveillance shots, but the context was clear. Rachel was meeting with these men in secret. One folder on the laptop was labeled Targets. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside were profiles of several people, names, addresses, schedules. My name was among them. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. Panic set in as I scrambled to close the laptop and find a hiding spot. I barely managed to duck behind the couch when the front door creaked open. "You're sure he's not onto us?" a man's voice asked. "He's clueless," Rachel replied, "but we need to move fast. If he finds out what's really going on." "What about Emily?" the man pressed. "She's already a liability." Rachel's voice turned icy. "I'll take care of her." The blood drained from my face. Emily wasn't just involved. She was in danger. I had to get out of there, but every movement felt like it would give me away. I waited until their voices moved to another room before slipping out through the same window I'd entered. Back in my car, I called Emily again. This time, she answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" I demanded. Her voice was shaky. "Hiding. Rachel. She's not who you think she is. She's dangerous. And if she knows I've talked to you—" "I know," I said, cutting her off. "Just tell me where you are. I'll come get you." She hesitated before giving me an address. It was a motel on the outskirts of town. I drove there as fast as I could, constantly checking my mirrors for signs of being followed. When I arrived, Emily looked like she'd been through hell. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She let me into her room, locking the door behind us. "Start talking," I said. What she told me was worse than anything I could have imagined. Rachel wasn't just unfaithful. She was part of a criminal network, running scams and cons with a group of accomplices. Their latest target? Me. They'd been setting me up for months, slowly draining my accounts and implicating me in their schemes. Emily had stumbled onto their operation by accident and had been trying to warn me ever since. But the worst part? Rachel wasn't planning to leave me. She was planning to frame me, to make me the fall guy for everything. "We have to go to the police," I said. Emily shook her head. "They have people everywhere. If you want to survive this, you need to disappear." It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but deep down, I knew she was right. My life as I knew it was over. The only question now was how far I was willing to go to take Rachel down with me. The next 48 hours were a blur of paranoia and planning. Emily and I pooled what resources we had: cash, burner phones, and a stolen car, and mapped out a way to escape. The plan was simple: disappear without a trace and find a way to expose Rachel and her network from the shadows. We executed our plan in silence, the weight of our predicament pressing down on us like a suffocating fog. Emily sat in the passenger seat, nervously glancing at the mirrors while I drove. The stolen car rattled over uneven back roads, the dim glow of the dashboard lights illuminating her pale face. We were heading to the one place we hoped Rachel's network wouldn't think to look. A small, dilapidated cabin deep in the woods, owned by Emily's late uncle. It was a temporary refuge, but it would buy us time to figure out our next move. When we arrived, the cabin was as run down as Emily had described. The windows were covered in grime, and the front porch sagged under the weight of neglect. Inside, the air was stale, and the furniture was coated in a thin layer of dust. But it was isolated, and that was all that mattered. Emily set to work securing the doors and windows while I unpacked the supplies we'd managed to gather. Canned food, bottled water, and a battered laptop that would be our lifeline to the outside world. "Do you think they're already looking for us?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded grimly. "Rachel's too smart not to notice we're gone. She'll know something's wrong." Emily sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she ran them through her hair. "I can't believe she'd do this. To you, to me. She's not the person I thought she was." "None of us saw this coming," I said, sitting across from her. "But now we have to focus on what's next. If we're going to take her down, we need proof." Emily nodded, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "I think I know where we can start." The laptop was old, its screen flickering occasionally as Emily worked. She tapped into old email accounts and social media profiles, searching for anything that could link Rachel to her network of criminals. It was slow going, but after hours of sifting through messages and photos, we found our first lead. A contact named Vance. "He's mentioned in a lot of her emails," Emily said, scrolling through the messages. "Looks like he handles their finances. Do you think we can track him?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "Maybe, but if we do, we'll have to be careful. If Rachel finds out we're digging into her operation, it's over for us." "Then we take the risk," I said. "If we can get to Vance, we can start unraveling their entire operation." The next step was finding Vance. His emails mentioned a series of locations, coffee shops, office buildings, and one particularly intriguing address. A storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Emily and I decided to start there. We arrived late at night, the storage facility's rows of metal doors stretching into the darkness. I picked the lock on Vance's unit while Emily kept watch. Inside, we found boxes filled with documents, laptops, and external hard drives. It was a gold mine. "Jackpot," Emily whispered, her flashlight sweeping over the stacks of papers. "This has to be everything we need. Let's grab what we can and get out of here," I said, my voice tight with urgency. As we loaded the documents into our car, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every shadow seemed to shift and move. When we finally drove away, the tension in the car was palpable. Back at the cabin, Emily and I pored over the documents. They detailed a sprawling web of fraud, embezzlement, and blackmail, all orchestrated by Rachel and her associates. Vance's meticulous records included bank transfers, fake identities, and even surveillance logs of their targets. My name appeared multiple times, along with notes about my habits, finances, and vulnerabilities. "This is it," Emily said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and horror. "This is enough to bring them all down." "Not yet," I said. "We need to make sure this gets into the right hands. The police, the media, someone who can actually use it." "But how do we do that without getting caught?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The following days were a blur of planning and paranoia. We created multiple backups of the documents, hiding them in different locations in case Rachel's people found us. Emily reached out to an old friend who worked as a journalist, someone she trusted to handle the story discreetly. Meanwhile, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Rachel. Came sooner than expected. One night, as Emily and I were reviewing the documents, the cabin's front door burst open. Rachel stood in the doorway, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. Her expression was a mix of fury and triumph. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You should have stayed clueless, Adam. It would have been easier for both of us." "Stay back," I shouted, stepping in front of Emily. "It's over, Rachel. We have everything. All your records, your emails, your transactions. You're finished." She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can stop this? You think anyone will believe you? By the time I'm done, you'll be nothing but a footnote in my story." Her men moved forward, but before they could reach us, Emily pulled a taser from her bag and fired. One of the men collapsed, convulsing as the electricity surged through him. The other hesitated, giving me just enough time to grab a wooden chair and swing it with all my strength. The man went down, groaning in pain. Rachel stepped back, her confidence wavering. "You're making a big mistake, Adam." "The only mistake I made was trusting you," I said, my voice cold. "It's over, Rachel." For the first time, she looked afraid. Without another word, she turned and fled into the night. Emily and I didn't wait to see if she'd come back. We grabbed the documents and drove straight to Emily's journalist contact, handing over everything we had. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, Rachel's network was exposed, their crimes plastered across headlines nationwide. Arrests were made, accounts were frozen, and Rachel, she disappeared. To this day, I don't know where she is or if she's still out there, plotting her revenge. As for Emily and me, we started over. New names, new lives, and a bond forged in the fires of betrayal. The scars of what we endured will never fully heal, but we survived. And in the end, that was enough. The stolen car hummed as Emily and I sped down a desolate road, the night swallowing us whole. The cabin in the woods had been compromised. We knew that much after seeing Rachel's men circling it earlier that day. Every mile we drove brought us closer to a precarious edge, but there was no other option now. We had one final shot to turn the tables. Emily had discovered a key piece of evidence buried in Rachel's files. A ledger detailing payments to a high-ranking police officer and a local politician. The transactions weren't just incriminating, they were explosive. If we could deliver this to the right person, it wouldn't just expose Rachel's operation. It would set off a chain reaction that would bring down everyone involved. The problem was finding someone trustworthy in a system that Rachel's network had already infected. "We can't just hand this over to any journalist," I said, glancing at Emily. "We need someone with reach, someone they can't intimidate or silence." Emily nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her laptop. "There's a national news anchor based in the city. Her team has a reputation for investigative journalism. If anyone can handle this, it's her. Can you get us a meeting?" "I'll try," Emily said. "But if Rachel's watching media channels, we'll have to move fast." The meeting was arranged for midnight at a neutral location, an all-night diner on the outskirts of the city. The anchor, Dana King, had agreed to meet after Emily's friend vouched for the authenticity of the evidence. Dana's presence felt like a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived. Dana sat in a corner booth, her sharp eyes scanning the room as we approached. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You have something explosive," she said, her voice low but steady. "Show me." Emily slid the laptop across the table, opening the files with practiced ease. Dana's eyes widened as she scrolled through the evidence. Bank statements, surveillance photos, and encrypted communications painted a damning picture of Rachel's empire. "This is big," Dana said, her tone tinged with awe. "If we break this story, it'll shake the foundation of this entire city." "That's why we came to you," I said. "But we need guarantees. If this leaks before you're ready, we're dead." Dana nodded, her expression serious. "My team will handle this with the utmost discretion. But I'll need your testimony to corroborate some of this." I hesitated. Putting my face on this operation would make me a target for life. But as I looked at Emily, her determination unwavering despite the fear in her eyes, I realized I didn't have a choice. "I'll do it," I said. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Dana's team worked tirelessly to verify the evidence, using their network of sources to uncover even more dirt on Rachel's operation. Meanwhile, Emily and I stayed hidden in a secure location provided by the news team. Paranoia was our constant companion, every creak of the floorboards or buzz of a phone sending us into high alert. Finally, the day came. Dana's investigative piece went live during the primetime evening news. The story was explosive, implicating not only Rachel but several high-profile figures in her web of corruption. The fallout was immediate. Arrests were made within hours, and Rachel's name became synonymous with betrayal and greed. But as the authorities closed in on her, Rachel vanished. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a fragile semblance of normalcy. Emily and I moved to a new city under new identities, determined to leave the chaos behind. But the scars of what we'd endured remained, a constant reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. One evening, as I sat on the porch of our modest new home, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You thought you could win," Rachel's voice said, cold and venomous. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Emily stepped outside, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" she asked. "She's still out there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "Then we stay ready. Whatever comes next, we face it together." And so the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Rachel may have built her empire on lies and manipulation, but she had underestimated one thing: the power of those she tried to destroy. We had survived her once. We could survive her again. The days after Rachel's ominous call were filled with tension and preparation. Emily and I knew better than to assume she'd stay in hiding for long. Rachel's power was in her ability to manipulate and strike when least expected. We needed to stay ahead of her, this time for good. Emily suggested leveraging the connections we'd made during the fallout of Rachel's network collapse. Dana King's team, bolstered by the credibility of their explosive report, had garnered allies in law enforcement and independent investigators. If Rachel tried to rebuild her empire, someone in that network would hear whispers of it. "We can't just wait for her to come to us," Emily said one evening, her voice steady but her hands trembling as she typed away on her laptop. "We need to set a trap." "A trap?" I asked, skepticism coloring my tone. "She's not stupid, Emily. She'll see through it." "Not if we make her believe she's already won," Emily said, her eyes meeting mine with a determined glint. It was a dangerous idea, but we didn't have many options. Rachel had always thrived on control and the belief that she was untouchable. If we could make her think she still held all the cards, she'd expose herself. The plan was risky but deceptively simple. Emily and I would leak false information about a hidden cache of evidence, something we claimed could exonerate Rachel and implicate new targets. The bait was set to lure her out of hiding, forcing her to make a move. We worked with Dana's team to plant the story in just the right circles. An encrypted email sent to a known associate of Rachel's, whispers in online forums frequented by her former allies, and a carefully staged drop of fake documents in a public space. It was enough to create a ripple, and soon the waters began to stir. The trap was sprung 2 weeks later. Late one night, a tip came in from one of Dana's sources. A private jet had landed at a small airstrip on the outskirts of the city. The passenger list was blank, but the description of the woman who disembarked left no doubt. Rachel was back. We coordinated with the authorities, ensuring that every move was monitored. Rachel's arrogance was her undoing. She walked straight into the trap, arriving at the storage unit where we'd claimed the evidence was hidden. When she entered, she was greeted not by the documents she sought but by a team of federal agents. The news of Rachel's arrest spread like wildfire. Headlines proclaimed the downfall of the once untouchable queen of corruption. Emily and I watched the coverage from the safety of our new home, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over us. "It's over," Emily said softly, her hand finding mine. I nodded, but a part of me remained cautious. Rachel had escaped before, and her network, though fractured, wasn't entirely gone. Still, for the first time in months, the shadow over our lives felt a little less oppressive. Months turned into years. Emily and I rebuilt our lives piece by piece, finding solace in the quiet moments we'd once taken for granted. Rachel's trial was a spectacle, her crimes laid bare for the world to see. She was sentenced to life without parole, her empire reduced to ashes. But even as the years passed, I couldn't forget the weight of her final words. They lingered like a ghost, a reminder of the chaos she'd unleashed. And while Emily and I had found peace, we never stopped looking over our shoulders. Because some battles may end, but the scars they leave never truly fade. Years passed, but Rachel's shadow lingered in unexpected ways. Despite her life sentence, whispers of her influence began surfacing in the most unexpected corners. It started with small anomalies. Someone accessing old bank accounts tied to her name, unexplained movements of money through offshore accounts that investigators had missed. Emily and I had worked tirelessly to ensure she couldn't rebuild, yet the signs were undeniable. Pieces of her network had survived. We tried to ignore it at first, clinging to the fragile peace we'd built. Emily had started a new job in cybersecurity, using her skills to help protect others from the kind of manipulation that had nearly destroyed us. I'd taken to writing fiction mostly as a way to exorcise the ghosts of our past. But the more we tried to move on, the more obvious it became. Rachel's reach was not as extinguished as we'd hoped. One evening, Emily came home pale and trembling, a sealed envelope clutched in her hands. She'd found it on the windshield of her car at work. "It's happening again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened the envelope cautiously. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a familiar handwriting scrawled across it. Asterisk, you've built a nice life. Don't make me ruin it. Asterisk. Rachel's threat was clear. She wasn't just watching us. She was waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily and I contacted Dana King, who had remained an ally and friend over the years. Her investigative team had kept tabs on Rachel's network, and the news she delivered was chilling. Some of her people never stopped working, Dana said during a late-night call. They've gone underground, operating in smaller cells, and it looks like they've been reconstructing their operation piece by piece. Why target us now? I asked. We're not a threat anymore. You were the reason her empire fell, Dana replied. She's obsessed with revenge, and she'll take it any way she can. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paranoia and preparation. Emily and I fortified our home, changed our routines, and reactivated old contacts who could help us. It felt like we were slipping back into a nightmare we'd barely escaped. But this time, we were determined to end it for good. Dana's team uncovered a critical lead, a safe house where Rachel's remaining operatives were believed to be operating. It was a long shot, but if we could find them, we could dismantle what was left of her network, and finally eliminate her influence for good. Emily and I decided to confront them head-on, coordinating with a trusted investigator from Dana's team. It was risky, but we'd learned the hard way that waiting only gave Rachel more power. The safe house was an unassuming property on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a chain-link fence and overgrown bushes. We approached under cover of darkness, armed with the tools and skills we'd acquired over the years. Inside, the operation was smaller than we'd feared, but no less dangerous. Computers hummed with activity, and files were scattered across desks, detailing plans that echoed the schemes Rachel had orchestrated before. We worked quickly, capturing evidence and disabling their systems. But as we moved through the rooms, it became clear that something was missing. Rachel herself. She wasn't there. Then the phone rang. Emily froze, her eyes locking onto the ringing phone on one of the desks. Slowly, I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. Clever. Rachel's voice purred on the other end. But not clever enough. It's over, I said, gripping the phone tightly. We've destroyed what's left of your network. Rachel laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. You've destroyed the past. But the future. Her tone darkened. The future is already mine. The line went dead. We left the safe house with the evidence we'd gathered, determined to finish what we'd started. The operation's remnants were enough to implicate several key players, and Dana's team worked tirelessly to expose them. But Rachel's words haunted me. Even as we celebrated another victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, one step ahead. Months later, as Emily and I walked through a crowded city square, I felt it. A pair of eyes watching us from the shadows. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the bustle of strangers and the hum of life moving on. What is it? Emily asked, noticing my hesitation. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile. Let's keep moving. But deep down I knew the truth. Rachel wasn't done with us. And as long as she was out there, the fight would never truly be over. The months following our confrontation with Rachel's operatives were a delicate dance between relief and unease. Emily and I had dismantled what remained of her immediate network, but the tendrils of her influence ran deeper than we could have imagined. Even from the shadows, she had found a way to haunt us. The first real sign came in the form of a package left on our doorstep. Emily was the one who found it, her face pale as she carried the small, unmarked box inside. Together, we opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a USB drive and a single note: "You should have stayed quiet." Against our better judgment, we plugged the drive into an isolated laptop. Files popped up immediately. Photos of Emily and me, surveillance logs detailing our daily routines, and a series of documents implicating us in crimes we didn't commit. Fraud, embezzlement, even a staged connection to a violent organization. It was a carefully constructed dossier designed to destroy us. "She's setting us up," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my mind racing. "We need to get ahead of this. If she releases this, it'll ruin everything," Emily finished. We reached out to Dana King once more, hoping her network could help us. Her team analyzed the files, confirming our worst fears. The evidence, though fabricated, was expertly crafted. If it were to leak, it would be nearly impossible to refute without significant damage to our lives. "She's playing a longer game," Dana said during a late-night meeting. "This isn't just about revenge anymore. She wants to discredit you completely, to erase any credibility you have left." "So what do we do?" I asked. Dana leaned back, her expression grim. "We turn it against her, but it's going to require a level of risk you might not be comfortable with." The plan was dangerous but necessary. Using the files Rachel had sent, Dana's team traced the digital breadcrumbs back to their origin. It led to a secure server overseas, protected by layers of encryption and proxies. Whoever was maintaining it was skilled, but not invulnerable. Emily and I worked closely with Dana's tech experts, feeding false data into the server while simultaneously extracting information. It was a cat-and-mouse game, every keystroke a potential risk of exposure. But after days of work, we uncovered the linchpin of Rachel's new operation: a high-profile financier funneling money into her schemes. "This is it," Emily said, staring at the name on the screen. "If we take him down, she loses everything." The next phase of the plan required precision. Dana arranged for a covert sting operation in collaboration with international authorities. The financier, a man named Victor Lang, was known for his ostentatious lifestyle and frequent appearances at exclusive events. His ego made him an easy target. Emily and I attended a charity gala where Lang was the guest of honor, blending into the crowd with Dana's guidance. As Lang basked in the attention of the wealthy elite, Emily slipped away to plant a device in his personal belongings. A device designed to extract crucial data linking him to Rachel's network. The operation was tense, every moment fraught with the risk of discovery. But when Emily returned, her face flushed with a mix of adrenaline and triumph, I knew we'd succeeded. The data retrieved from Lang's device was the final piece we needed. It detailed financial transactions, communications, and plans that tied Rachel's operations together. With this evidence, Dana's team coordinated with law enforcement to dismantle the remaining infrastructure of Rachel's empire. Within weeks, arrests were made across multiple countries. Victor Lang was publicly disgraced, his assets seized and his reputation destroyed. And as for Rachel, the trail led to a remote location in South America, where she had been hiding under an assumed identity. This time, there was no escape. She was extradited and faced new charges that ensured she'd never see the outside world again. Emily and I watched the news coverage from the safety of our home. The relief was palpable, but it was tempered by exhaustion. This time it felt final. Rachel's network was gone, her influence dismantled piece by piece. "It's over," Emily said softly, leaning against me. I nodded, letting the weight of her words settle in. "This time, it really is." But even as we celebrated the end of Rachel's reign, I knew the scars would remain. The battles we'd fought had changed us irrevocably. Yet, for the first time in years, the shadow over our lives had lifted. And in its place there was light. Months passed after Rachel's extradition, and for the first time in years, Emily and I began to breathe easier. The remnants of her network had been dismantled, and her name had become synonymous with disgrace. Yet, the scars she left behind lingered, shaping the way we navigated our new reality. Emily threw herself into her cybersecurity career, her expertise now sought after by organizations that wanted to ensure they wouldn't fall prey to the type of manipulation Rachel had perfected. I too found solace in rebuilding, writing stories that, while fictional, carried echoes of the chaos we had survived. One evening, as we sat on our modest porch watching the sunset, Emily spoke up, her voice tinged with a mix of relief and caution. "Do you ever feel like it's really over?" I hesitated, the question lingering in the air. "I want to believe it is," I said. "But there's a part of me that knows. Someone like Rachel doesn't just disappear. Even if she's locked away, her influence might outlive her." Emily nodded, her hand finding mine. "We'll face it if it ever comes. Together." The next test of our resolve came unexpectedly. Dana King's team reached out with news that sent chills down my spine. A low-level operative, once connected to Rachel's network, had surfaced in an unrelated investigation. Among the seized items was a ledger, one that contained names, dates, and cryptic notes. "Your names are in it," Dana said during a secure call. "It's not clear what Rachel intended, but it's enough to warrant a closer look." The ledger hinted at contingency plans, accounts Rachel had stashed away, contacts she had maintained despite her downfall. And buried within the notes was a single line that made my blood run cold. Asterisk, "The final play is yet to come." Asterisk. Emily and I found ourselves thrust back into the world we had fought so hard to escape. With Dana's help, we began piecing together the fragments Rachel had left behind. Each discovery painted a picture of a woman who had anticipated every scenario, who had laid traps even as her empire crumbled. The investigation led us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a city where Rachel had once operated. It was here that we uncovered the heart of her final gambit, a cache of evidence implicating powerful figures who had quietly aided her rise and fall. It was blackmail material of the highest order, enough to destabilize governments and corporations alike. "If this gets out," Emily said, scanning the files on a dusty laptop, "it'll undo everything we've worked for." "Then we make sure it doesn't," I said. The race was on to secure the cache before Rachel's remaining allies could mobilize. With Dana's team providing support, we worked to neutralize the threat. It was a harrowing process, every step fraught with the risk of exposure. But piece by piece, we dismantled the infrastructure Rachel had left behind. Finally, after weeks of relentless effort, the cache was neutralized. The files were handed over to trusted authorities, their contents carefully managed to avoid the chaos Rachel had intended. Her final play had been stopped before it could begin. In the aftermath, Emily and I made a decision that had been a long time coming. We packed our belongings and moved to a quiet coastal town far from the places that had defined our past. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the shadows behind. As we settled into our new life, The weight of the years began to lift. The scars remained, but they no longer defined us. And for the first time, we felt the possibility of a future unburdened by Rachel's influence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily turned to me and smiled. "Do you think we've finally outrun her?" I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we've done more than that. We've reclaimed our lives." And as the waves crashed against the shore, I allowed myself to believe it was true. The months that followed our move to the quiet coastal town were peaceful, almost too peaceful. Emily and I had worked hard to distance ourselves from Rachel's shadow, and for a while, it felt like we had succeeded. But the scars she left weren't just physical or emotional. They were woven into the fabric of our lives, always reminding us of what we'd endured. One night, as Emily and I sat on the porch watching the waves crash against the shore, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face instantly clouding with concern. "It's Dana," she said, answering the call. Dana's voice was hurried, almost frantic. "We have a situation. I think you'd better sit down for this." Emily put the phone on speaker. "What's going on?" "We've been monitoring chatter from what's left of Rachel's network," Dana began. "Someone's trying to rebuild. There have been coordinated attempts to recover her old assets, accounts, contacts, even some of the blackmail material you helped neutralize." My stomach sank. "Do you think it's her?"
Dana hesitated.
"She's still locked away. But whoever's behind this knows her methods. And they're targeting you." The next morning, Emily and I reviewed the details Dana had sent. It was clear that whoever was orchestrating this resurgence had a personal vendetta. Bank accounts linked to us had been probed, and our names had surfaced in encrypted communications. The message was clear. Rachel's legacy wasn't finished with us yet. "We need to stop this before it spirals," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tension in her eyes. "Agreed," I replied. "But this time we're not just defending ourselves. We're taking the fight to them." With Dana's help, we began tracing the breadcrumbs left by Rachel's would-be successor. The trail led us to a mid-level operative who had slipped through the cracks during the original takedown. His name was Gregor Vance, and he had been one of Rachel's key enforcers, a man known for his ruthlessness and loyalty. Vance was operating out of a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of a nearby city. Emily and I decided to confront him directly, coordinating with Dana to ensure we had backup in case things went south. The warehouse was dimly lit, its towering shelves lined with dusty crates and machinery. Emily and I moved quietly through the shadows, our footsteps muffled by the concrete floor. In the distance, we could hear voices, Vance's unmistakable bark and the murmurs of his accomplices. We found him in a makeshift office at the back of the warehouse, surrounded by monitors displaying surveillance feeds and spreadsheets of financial data. Emily stepped forward first, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We know what you're doing, Vance. It's over." He spun around, surprise flashing across his face before being replaced by a smug grin. Well, if it isn't Rachel's favorite targets. You've got guts showing up here." "This ends now," I said, my voice firm. "We're not letting you drag us back into her mess." Vance leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms. "You think you can stop this? Rachel might be gone, but her vision lives on. You can't kill an idea." "No," Emily said, stepping closer. "But we can bury it." What happened next was a blur. Dana's team moved in swiftly, their presence overwhelming Vance's small operation. Computers were seized, files collected, and Vance himself taken into custody. As he was led away, he shot us one last glare, his words ringing in my ears. "You think this is over? You're just delaying the inevitable." The fallout from Vance's capture was significant. The data recovered from his operation revealed the extent of his plans to rebuild Rachel's empire. More arrests followed, and the remnants of her network were dealt another crippling blow. Emily and I returned home, exhausted but resolute. For the first time, it felt like we were no longer running. Instead, we had taken control, ensuring that Rachel's influence would never haunt us again. As we sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily took my hand. "Do you think this is the end?" I looked at her, the woman who had stood by me through every storm, and smiled. "If it's not, we'll face whatever comes next, together." And as the waves crashed against the shore, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. The future was ours, and for the first time it felt truly free. Despite Vance's capture and the dismantling of another arm of Rachel's network, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Her final words, uttered years ago, echoed in my mind. Asterisk, the final play is yet to come. Asterisk, they felt less like a threat and more like a prophecy. Emily and I tried to move forward. Our coastal town offered tranquility we hadn't known in years, and Dana's team reassured us that Rachel's empire was in shambles. But peace came with an edge of paranoia. We double-checked locks, avoided routines, and scanned every crowd for faces that felt out of place. One evening, while Emily was out running errands, a manila envelope appeared on our doorstep. My heart raced as I picked it up. No name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper and a photograph. The paper bore one sentence. Asterisk, you thought you won. Asterisk. The photograph was of Emily, taken earlier that day at the local market. My hands shook as I called her, relief washing over me when she answered on the first ring. "Get home now," I said. "We have a problem." Dana arrived the next day, bringing her top security expert. We reviewed the envelope for clues, but whoever had delivered it was meticulous.
No fingerprints, no identifying marks.
The photograph, grainy but clear enough to recognize Emily, was taken from a distance, likely with a telephoto lens. "This is a message," Dana said, her expression grim. "They're trying to intimidate you. They want you to feel like they're always watching." "It's working," Emily said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound composed. "But what do they want?"
Dana hesitated.
"Maybe they're testing the waters. Or maybe this is the beginning of something bigger." The following weeks were a nightmare. More envelopes arrived, each containing cryptic messages and photos of Emily and me going about our daily lives. We changed our routines, installed more security cameras, and even considered moving again. But the envelopes always found us. The breaking point came when a USB drive was delivered. Dana's tech expert scanned it for malware before we viewed its contents. The video it contained was brief but horrifying. It showed Rachel, sitting in what appeared to be a small, dimly lit cell. She looked older, her once sharp features softened by time and confinement. But her eyes, they still burned with the same cold fury. "You thought locking me away would end this," she said, her voice steady despite the grainy audio. "But my legacy doesn't die with me. It lives on through those who believe in the vision I created. And they will ensure that you pay for what you've done." The video ended abruptly, leaving a void of silence that felt deafening. Dana's team launched an investigation, tracing the origins of the video. It had been uploaded to a secure server before being distributed through an encrypted network. The trail led to a series of dead ends, but one thing was clear. Rachel's influence still lingered, even from behind bars. Emily and I were left grappling with a grim reality. Rachel's network, fragmented as it was, remained a threat. And now it wasn't just about power or control, it was personal. Her followers were determined to carry out her vendetta, and we were their ultimate target. As the days turned into weeks, Emily and I made a decision. We couldn't keep running, couldn't keep living in fear. If Rachel's followers wanted a fight, we'd bring it to them. With Dana's help, we began mapping out what remained of the network, identifying weak points and key players. It was a dangerous game, but we were done being pawns. This time, we'd be the ones setting the board. The operation began with small, calculated moves. Emily's expertise in cybersecurity allowed us to infiltrate communication channels and disrupt their coordination. We fed them false leads, forcing them to waste resources and reveal more of their structure. Each step brought us closer to dismantling what remained of Rachel's legacy. The final confrontation came on a rainy night in an industrial complex just outside the city. Dana's team had tracked the group's leader, a man named Colin Hark, to a clandestine meeting with his top operatives. Emily and I watched from a distance as federal agents closed in, the storm masking the sound of their approach. The raid was swift and decisive. Hark and his operatives were taken into custody, their equipment and files seized. Among the evidence was a manifesto outlining their plans to resurrect Rachel's empire and exact revenge on those who had brought her down. As we drove home that night, the rain pounding against the windshield, Emily reached over and took my hand. "Do you think this is really the end?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. I squeezed her hand, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. "If it's not, we'll be ready." For the first time in years, I believed it. Rachel's shadow had loomed over our lives for far too long. But now, as the storm began to clear, I felt a sense of closure. The future was still uncertain, but it was ours to shape. And that was enough. Life after the final takedown of Rachel's network felt different. Like a deep breath held for years had finally been released. The shadow she cast over our lives had dissipated. And for the first time, Emily and I felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Hope. The days were quieter in our coastal town. Emily found solace in her work, now consulting on cybersecurity projects designed to prevent networks like Rachel's from ever gaining traction again. I immersed myself in writing, turning the chaos of the past into fictional narratives that allowed me to process it all. But healing wasn't linear. There were still moments when we'd catch each other staring into the distance, lost in thoughts of what could have been or the lives we might have lived if Rachel had never existed. "Do you ever think about how it started?" Emily asked one evening as we sat on the beach, the waves lapping at the shore. I nodded. More than I'd like to admit, but thinking about it doesn't change it. We survived her. That's what matters. She smiled faintly. Surviving isn't the same as living. It was true. Surviving Rachel's wrath had consumed years of our lives. Now, the challenge was learning how to live beyond it. One day, as I sorted through a box of old files Dana had returned to us after the final raid, I found something unexpected. A letter from Rachel. It wasn't addressed to us, but to someone named Elise, a name that hadn't appeared in any of the files we'd uncovered. The letter was cryptic, filled with Rachel's characteristic blend of arrogance and manipulation. but one line stood out. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means I've been silenced. But the work isn't over. You know what to do. Asterisk. I showed the letter to Emily and Dana. Together, we dug into who Elise might be. What we found was unsettling. Elise Winters, a former protege of Rachel's, had disappeared years ago. She was presumed to have left Rachel's network during a purge of disloyal operatives. But the letter suggested otherwise. Do you think she's still out there? Emily asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dana frowned. If she is, she's been quiet. But Rachel wouldn't have written this if she didn't trust Elise to continue her work. The revelation cast a shadow over our newfound peace. Elise's name became a ghost, lingering at the edges of every conversation, every decision. Emily and I debated whether to dig deeper or let it go, but ultimately we agreed that vigilance was our best defense. We've come too far to ignore this, I said one night as we reviewed old case files. If she's out there, we need to know. But how do you fight someone you can't find? Emily asked. The same way we fought Rachel, I replied, by staying one step ahead. Months turned into a year, and though we uncovered fragments of Elise's possible movements, nothing concrete emerged. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. But instead of filling us with dread, the search became a reminder of how much we'd endured and how resilient we'd become. Emily and I built a life around that resilience. We traveled to places we'd always dreamed of visiting, started new hobbies, and forged friendships with people who didn't know us as survivors of Rachel's chaos. Slowly, we began to reclaim the years she had stolen from us. And while the specter of Elise remained, it no longer defined us. We had faced the storm and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, we knew we could face it together. On the second anniversary of the final raid, Emily and I returned to the beach where we'd first dared to believe in a future beyond Rachel. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, she turned to me and smiled. Do you think she's still out there? She asked softly. I considered the question, then shook my head. It doesn't matter. We're here. We're free. That's all that matters now. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The second anniversary of Rachel's downfall marked a pivotal turning point for Emily and me. While her specter lingered in the recesses of our minds, the years had taught us how to live without letting it dominate our lives. The mystery of Elise Winters, though unsettling, became less of an imminent threat and more of a reminder of Rachel's arrogance. But as time passed, the fear lost its grip on us. We chose to focus on what lay ahead. Emily's cybersecurity career blossomed, and she found immense fulfillment in mentoring a new generation of professionals. Her story of survival became an inspiration, though she shared it sparingly, choosing to protect the life we'd carefully rebuilt. I, on the other hand, channeled my energy into writing, publishing a series of novels that subtly wove our experiences into fiction. The process was cathartic, allowing me to finally process the chaos and find peace within it. Our new community embraced us as we embraced it. We hosted dinners, joined local volunteer groups, and created memories untainted by Rachel's shadow. The friends we made knew us as Adam and Emily, ordinary people living an extraordinary second chance at life. Elise Winters' name faded from our conversations. Dana's team occasionally checked in, sharing updates that grew less frequent as Rachel's remaining influence dwindled. The network she'd painstakingly built was gone, replaced by a scattering of disjointed remnants incapable of causing significant harm. And then, one day, it truly felt over. Emily and I were sitting on our porch, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and freedom, when Dana called. Her voice was calm, even relieved. "It's done," she said. "We traced the last known operatives and dismantled what little was left. Elise Winters. If she's alive, she's gone dark. There's nothing left of Rachel's empire." Emily and I exchanged a look, the weight of years lifting in an instant. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "For everything."
Dana laughed softly.
"You two did most of the heavy lifting. Just promise me you'll enjoy the peace you've earned." "We will," Emily promised. And we did. The finality of Dana's words allowed us to fully embrace the life we'd rebuilt. The fear that once lingered in every shadow was replaced by an unshakable sense of freedom. We no longer looked over our shoulders or questioned every stranger. We were free, not just from Rachel, but from the person she had forced each of us to become. Years later, as we sat on that same porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily rested her head on my shoulder. "We made it," she said softly. I nodded, the words catching in my throat. We did. And as the stars began to fill the sky, we closed the chapter on